Hi everyone, this is Helloangel.design. Today we are going to be making a dress with a puff sleeve and elastic. In our previous video, I show how to adjust your sleeve pattern paper whereby you can have a puff sleeve and add elastic around. Please support us by subscribing, thumbs up on our video and comment down below. You can also follow us on Facebook. Please support us by giving us stars on Facebook. It's not a requirement. If you feel like you benefit from this video, please give us stars on Facebook. My Facebook page is Helloangel.design, and you can also give us super thanks on YouTube. It is not a requirement. If you benefit and you let one or two things, if you give us a super thanks, that is how you're showing that you love our video and you have benefit so much from our video. Let's get right to this tutorial. I have cut out my fabric both front and back, and I've also cut out my skirt, and I've also cut out my sleeve. The only adjustment that I did when I cut out my sleeve is to shorten the length of my sleeve. The full length of my sleeve is about 22.5 centimeters, and then I measure 17 centimeters. So when I measure 17 centimeters and then I fold it inside, instead of cutting out these pieces out, you just fold it inside, place it on your fabric and then cut it out. So this is how I cut out my sleeve. So I have two pieces right here. When you cut out your sleeve, make sure to notch the sleeve edge and also notch the front of the sleeve, which I have done that. I have cut out the front top dress, the back. I have two pieces right here. I'm going to use the same fabric to line in my top dress. This is the front, this is the back. And I've also cut out my skirt. The skirt that we are making, the back is going to be a snap closure. So what you are going to do, you are going to put your back skirt on fold. Instead of cutting two pieces, put it on fold. I have cut out the front and I've also cut out the back. I'm using this white fabric to line in my skirt. And let's put the dress together. First thing that you have to do, you open your front top dress. This is the front of my top dress, and I will pick the back pieces. I'm going to put the both shoulder seam together. Once I am done with that, I will take it to my sewing machine and stitch it with 1 centimeter seam allowance. And then I will also take the lining. So this is going to be my lining. I will put the both shoulder seam together. Once I am done, and I will take it to my sewing machine and stitch it with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Depends on the seam allowance that you add on your fabric. You go ahead and stitch the shoulder seam together. Once I am done with that, and I will take my sleeve. So I'm going to take my sleeve to my sewing machine and I will stitch a gather stitch thread at the top edge of my sleeve. I will also repeat the same process with the second sleeve. Stitch a gather stitch thread at the top edge of my sleeve. Once I am done with that, I will take my sleeve to my ironing board. I will fold inside 1 centimeter, fold it again 1 centimeter and give it a good press. Once I am done with that, and I will take it to my sewing machine and I will stitch it all the way down because we are going to add elastic right there. I have stitched the shoulder seam of my top dress, and I've also stitched the lining together. And this is my sleeve. I have hemmed my sleeve and stitched a gather stitch thread at the top edge of my sleeve. The next thing that you have to do, you are going to put the both front fabric together. That means you take your lining, you place it on your top dress. Make sure that both front fabric are facing each other. You are going to stitch around the neckline and the center back. For my center back top dress, I add 3 centimeters. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. So I will use 1 centimeter to stitch it, and I'll have 2 centimeters left. That will be for my snap closure or buttonhole. I have stitched the neckline of my top dress, and I've also stitched the center back together. I turn it inside out, take it to my ironing board and give it a good press. The next thing that we have to do, we are going to put the side seam together. This is the front of my top dress. This is the front of the back. You put them together and you stitch it with your seam allowance. My seam allowance is 1 centimeter. And then you take the back. This is the back pieces, and then you take the other lining, that is the front. You put them together. You will also stitch it with your 1 centimeter seam allowance. Depends on the seam allowance that you add on your fabric. Once you have done that, you also repeat the same process on this other side. Put the front together, stitch it with your seam allowance. Take the back pieces, that will be the lining, stitch it with your seam allowance. Once you have done that, take it to an ironing board and press the seam apart. The next thing that we have to do, we are going to stitch our skirt. So what you are going to do, you open your skirt, put the both front fabric together. You are going to stitch the side seam with your seam allowance. My seam allowance is 1 centimeter. You come down to this other side, put the side seam together, stitch it with your 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once you have done that, use that opportunity to hem your skirt. And then you also take your lining, put the both side seam together, stitch it with your 1 centimeter seam allowance. Depends on the seam allowance that you add on your fabric. And you come down to this other side seam, stitch it with your 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once you have done that, also hem your skirt. Remember to overlock the both side seam raw edges. I have stitched the side seam of my top dress. This is how it is, and I use that opportunity to place the lining and the made fabric together, and I give it a top stitch around the armhole so that I know that that is secure. And I repeat the same process on this other side of the armhole. And I've also stitched my skirt together, and I've hemmed my skirt all around. Instead of me hemming the lining, I just stitch a lace around the bottom edge, and I stitch it all around, and I've also overlock all the raw edges. So when you are putting the skirt and the lining together, I am going to explain that. So what you are going to do, this is my lining and this is my made fabric. So instead of the raw edges of the lining is showing right here, so the raw edges will be hidden. So what you're going to do, this is the back of my made fabric, this is the back of my lining, so I just put them together like this. So when you open your lining, there is no raw edges showing right here. All the raw edges are hidden. Once you've done that, you just go ahead and stitch a gather stitch thread at the waistline of the skirt. Once you have done that, the next thing that we have to do, we are going to take a measurement at the center back, because we are going to attach a bracket at the center back. So I will place my measuring tape like this from the waistline. I'm going to take a measurement of 7 centimeters right here. Once you take that measurement, all you are going to do, you take your scissors, you cut it down to that 7 centimeters. So I will turn my fabric and I'm going to cut it down. I have cut it down to that 7 centimeters. The next thing that you have to do, you cut a piece of fabric. My fabric, I folded it into two. The measurement is 3 centimeters. Remember, when we were stitching our top dress, the seam allowance that I add is 3 centimeters. 1 centimeter for stitching it, 2 centimeters for your buttonhole or snap closure. You open your piece of fabric like this and then you place it like this. When you are cutting your fabric, make sure that it is longer. You can always cut at the excess. All you are going to do, you just go ahead and pin it all around. I have pinned it together. This is how it is. So what you are going to do, take it to your sewing machine, stitch it with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once you have done stitching, take your scissors, trim a little bit out from the seam allowance, and this other side, fold inside 1 centimeter, and then you fold it to cover the raw edges and give it a top stitch all around. I have stitched my placket together. This is how it is. And this side, I fold it inside and I give it a top stitch. And this side is open. When you stitch it, it's going to be open like this. But you have to fold one side inside and top stitch. So the next thing that you have to do, you are going to gather your skirt at the waistline of your top dress. I believe many of you know how to gather your skirt at the waistline of your top dress. Once I have done gathering my skirt, I will show you how that looks. I have pinned my skirt around the waistline of my top dress. This is how it is. I will take it to my sewing machine and top stitch with 1.3 centimeter or half an inch. When I pin my skirt around the waistline of my top dress, I separate my lining. I did not pin them together. Once you stitch your skirt together, you just fold inside half an inch or 1.3 centimeter and use it to cover the raw edges. The same seam allowance that you use to stitch your skirt, the same seam allowance that you will fold inside when you are covering the raw edges around the waistline. I have stitched my skirt at the waistline of my top dress. This is how it looks once you have done doing that. And I fold my lining to cover the raw edges. This is how it is. And you can see that I have already placed my elastic around the sleeve, which I will tell you the measurement later. So this is my sleeve. I haven't placed elastic on this sleeve. So what you are going to do, you are going to take a measurement for your elastic. The measurement that I have here is 19 centimeter. So what you're going to do, you place your pin right here and then you just pass your elastic inside this 1 centimeter that we use to hem the sleeve. You just pass it in all around. I have passed my elastic through. This is how it is. What I'm going to do, I will top stitch the elastic right here and I will top stitch the elastic right here. Once I am done with that, I'll put both side seam of the sleeve together and top stitch. Once I am done stitching, I will take it to my overlocker, overlock the raw edges before attaching the sleeve on the dress. I have top stitched the side seam of my sleeve. This is how it looks once you have done that. The next thing that you're going to do, you're going to attach it on the armhole of your dress. So you just open it like this. This is the front of my sleeve, so I will place it inside. I'll make sure that both side seams are matched and I will secure that with a pin. And this is the sleeve head, which I have notched, and I will make sure that both sleeve head and shoulder seam are matched, and I will secure that with a pin. So what I'm going to do, I am going to place a few pins on the dress before I start to gather it. So I have placed a few pins around like this. This is how I place the pin. So this is what I'm going to gather. I'm going to gather this side to the sleeve. I'm going to gather this side to the sleeve head. So all you have to do, you just pick your gather stitch thread and you start pulling the fabric. I have pinned it all around. This is how it is once you have done that. So what I'm going to do, I will take mine to my sewing machine and stitch it with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Once I am done stitching, I will remove the gather stitch thread, take it to my overlocker, overlock the raw edges, and you will use the opportunity to stitch your buttonhole at the center back of your dressmaking or install your snap closure. I will show you the final look of my dressmaking.